Good afternoon. We are reading the second to last in chapter 3. The summary is already uploaded, so keep that in mind. We are reading from Expectation to Intention, dealing with change. Britton recommends turning expectations into intention. She defines expectations as, quote, what you think ought to happen as a result of what you do, say, or plan. Unquote. Fear is built into every expectation because we can't always predict the outcome of what we expect, especially when other people are involved. When we change that expectation into an intention, which Britton defines as, quote, living purposefully, on purpose, with purpose, proactively, responsibly, and intuitively. When intention is our mode of operation, we give up the idea that our past dictates our future. Intention is living in the present, actively choosing the future while being aware that in each moment, your state of mind is up to you. Intention is the pathway to shift your focus from fear to freedom, unquote. And that's from Britton in 2001. What this means is that the real freedom is realizing that your future is in your own hands and doesn't have to depend on you wishing, waiting, and hoping for a different outcome, but being proactive in your own life. If this sounds scary, it can't be more scary than leaving your life up to fate. This would be like bobbing around in an ocean without a rudder. You have to provide your own rudder. In an interview with Georgia Rowe in the Contra Costa Times about his new book, What Should I Do With My Life?, author Poe Bronson, who interviewed 900 people from various walks of life, talks about the things that stop people from changing even when they are going down the wrong track. He says, quote, I began to make lists of fears that people have. Fear of choosing, fear of irreversibility, fear of what your parents are going to say, fear of being broke, fear of failing and destroying your fantasy, unquote. He doesn't imply that overcoming these fears is easy. He did say, quote, but it did seem that for the most part of their lives, these people had made certain assumptions about who they are, about the notion that their talent should have manifested itself early in life. Then they heard an urge, and that urge slowly erupted in their lives, and they discovered talents that they didn't even know they had. So I think that the notion that our talents should be clear keeps us from finding things. We can devote ourselves to finding things that can make us happy, unquote, and that is by Rowe in 2003. How true this last statement can be for adult adoptees who spent much of their lives trying to fit into a family that may have had different criteria for professions, lifestyles, and values, and that which might have been native to the adoptee. I know myriad of adoptees who have studied for and acquired a profession because it was what they assumed their parents wanted them to do. In some cases, this was true, but in others, it was only a perception. It is time for everyone to reach deep inside and discover those talents, which may have lain dormant for the past 20 plus years. It is hoped that by the end of this book, some methods for doing so will be evident. Okay, so pausing here for a moment. I want to not pausing because that's the end of the chapter, but here's my commentary towards all of this. I have been that person who I thought I knew what I want to do from the beginning of my life. I always thought I wanted to be a marine biologist. That was my goal in life. And then I was about 13 when my hopes and dreams were dashed. I was told I would never be able to have a family while being a marine biologist because of financial, just how much they get paid. This was not my parents' doing. I want to make that clear. They were very supportive of me continuing my dream. So then I switched, I'll be a vet. Okay, like, I love animals. I've worked with animals my entire life. And so I continued on. I started college doing vet tech work, which, don't get me wrong, I love. Worked on a farm, had a farm, yada, yada, yada. And by the way, I still work with animals, even though I'm not a vet tech. However, during that time, there was a moment at the animal hospital I was working at where I watched as this man's pet, it was a bird, had to have CPR. And we were trying really hard to save this bird. And I just didn't have the emotion towards this animal. Like, knowing statistically that birds die 90% of the time after surgery, I just, like, don't get me wrong, I felt bad, right? Like, I've lost pets. But there was just something, like, everyone was crying and I'm just standing there like, I just didn't feel grief. And for me, that hit me like, maybe this isn't the job for me. So then I went on, I did some photography, and I am very good at it, but it's a very hard profession to get into, in terms of, I was doing animal life photography and landscape, but it's hard to make a career out of, to be honest with you guys. And then I did teach for a while in preschool, and I did love it, but I was just missing out on my kid's life. I worked at, some big retail stores. Again, loved it, but missing out on my kid's life. And I keep thinking back to, what if I had continued with my passion? But then I wouldn't be here today doing content creation. I wouldn't be an author. I wouldn't, be doing what I do enjoy. Now, yes, I think that it's a different type of love. And, I didn't discover this till I was in my 20s, which it's really funny because going through school, I was not the best at, English class. History, amazing. English, not so much. The difference in writing styles was just different, right? And I did go to school for a little bit for film, which I wouldn't mind going back, but that's very complicated. Anyway, I kind of had to make my own way, right? And I will say that in my adoptive family, I am I shouldn't say I'm the only one, but I'm one of the outcast in terms of professions, right? Everyone else is like a lawyer or a doctor or a teacher, and here I am. I'm like, I'm a content creator. I'm an author, but I did find my way because my grandma, my adopted grandma, Grandma Fran, while she did teach, she also was an author. And it's kind of funny that my cousin and I, one of my cousins, okay, specifically my fellow adoptee cousin and I were the closest to her. We were the ones that she told us everything. We went through our ancestry. We created books with her. We just had such a beautiful relationship with her. And that's not to say that the others didn't have a relationship with her. It just was different. But you can make your own path. Now, in terms of my biological family and my professions, right? I didn't mention I ended up going to culinary school. I became a pastry chef and chocolatier. And while I do have my degree in that, I did stop using that for the most part because of COVID. That's, again, more complex because, pandemic. But I was also, I was still writing. I was still content creating. That was just a different form of content creation. And I still love it and I still use it, just not to the same extent. Sorry, going back to my biological family, right? My biological family is a group of very creative people. Now, I will be honest, I don't know exactly what everyone did. I just heard that everyone had a very creative, what my adopted mom would say, creative bone in their family, right? And I do know that at one point, my birth mom was cake decorating, right, professionally. I don't think that's what she does now. It's complex, but I knew that I had to have a job where I had some sort of creativity, right? And while I did love teaching, I just didn't feel like it was creative enough for me to continue on, right? I can still teach in other aspects. I just don't want to be in the classroom. And don't get me wrong, I miss those kids. Those kids are now teenagers. Oh my God, I'm aging myself. But you guys get the point, right? But of course, a lot of parents are going to expect you to become those professions where they see that you make a lot of money, right? They want you to, I think a lot of parents in general just expect you to have not only the education, but the financial support of a profession, even if it makes you unhappy, right? And so while my adoptive mother, she worked in law for a while. She wasn't a lawyer. She almost went to law school. But she worked in law for a while, and then she ended up going back to school for social work, and that's where she was a lot happier. And while she too was kind of like, quote unquote, the outcast of her family, and for more reasons than that, it was a change that made her happy of what she was able to do and how she was able to make changes to the world, to help the students that she worked with, or many of them. Whereas my dad worked in law as well, but it was kind of more of a stiff understanding, right? And I think it really just depends on not just expectations, but what makes you happy? What are your passions? And I always tell my child this, like, you're still young. Think about what you want to do in your future. Now, he very much wants to be also a YouTuber. He wants to do gaming, and I completely understand. But I always tell him, have a backup plan. Have education behind it. If you are wanting to go into being a content creator like me, make it a business, right? What are you going to post? When are you going to post? What are your topics? How are you going to produce things, right? So think about graphic design. Think about social media. All of these things that really play a role in our technological world today, right? Where should YouTube ever go down, how can you transfer these skills to a different job? And I always tell them this because it's super, super important to do, right? You want those transferable skills on your job app, on your resume. These are really important in that aspect, right? Think in the future. Even though you have the passion to be a YouTuber, how are you going to, how are you going to treat it? So just keep that in mind.